One of the things that you mentioned that I think is really important is the idea that that the lowering of the age of sexual consent, because what's happening with medical consent is that we've lowered the age of medical consent.
That's in the States.
And that again, because we're being kind, we're trying to be nice. Of course, we're going
Yeah.
to allow you to do this. So now we have kids as young as 12 or 13 who are told that they're capable of medical consent, and so it's not a leap at all to suggest that that's going to lead to the breaking down of boundaries for sex with kids, and suggesting that children are old enough to consent to sex, which we're already seeing happening. In California, they just passed a law that allows adults to have sex with children as long as it's a same-sex relationship, and that adult is not going to be considered a sex offender. Yeah. And ultimately, I know, and ultimately, all of this I see is going to have a huge backlash against the LGBT, because
Yes. And this is what I'm seeing. I'm already getting questions, people asking me, just because I'm gay, what is non-binary? And I'm like, well, ask a non-binary person. What is trans? What is this? La, 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 la. Now, what's interesting is that a lot of trans people don't want to talk about a lot of these things because it invalidates them. Whereas I now have quite a bit of information having spoken to them, and also trans people for whom transitioning wasn't the best thing for them. But the thing is, we've been sold as a society this lie that, one, you can change sex. And at least, we're from the generation where we know that it wasn't always like that. Yeah. But the younger generation, who's lapping everything up from Snapchat and Instagram and Tumblr, they just buy into this stuff, and they don't see the difference anymore between being feminine and being female, or masculine and male, because it's all just in your head as an identity now. And that's why they get so irate, because they don't get it. No,
they've been thoroughly brainwashed. The lobotomy has succeeded in their case. So just out of curiosity, when you saw those two older trans people at the Pride parade,
right? So
okay, just question, what are trans rights? Because I think most of us are pretty clear about what gay rights are and what LGBT rights are, or LGBT rights are. But what concerns a lot of us is that T seems to be not about rights. I always think it's sort of about feelings are more important than women's and girls' rights at this point. And so, do you have a sense of what when someone's saying, when those two older people had to sign for trans rights?
So there was an article I read, written by a trans person, of course, that listed all the rights that they're looking for in all the countries around the world. And a lot of them, I was reading them and I thought, but these aren't rights. And also, if you do consider them rights, they are in direct conflict with already existing rights. And one of the rights was, in the UK, to have surgery at a younger age. So a person who is not legally able to consent until they're 16, I think it's 16 in the UK, it's 16 or 18, but I think it's 16. They're not allowed to drive or to vote, but they are allowed to make up their mind and say, oh, I need the hormones and I want the surgery. And actually, I would like the surgery at 14 or 13, like you can have in the States. And there's one really sad case of a girl called Penny, who identified as trans or started presenting as trans. This is the thing about kids. They have the passion of youth. It's a beautiful phrase. They come at things with such determination. I want this, I need this, especially if they've been told at school, you can be born in the wrong body, and that health providers have been told to use the affirmation model, so they can't ask the question or unpick the story. We always need to look at the story. And my key thing in life, people may come at me, after this interview and say, I'm a transphobe, I'm a this, I'm a bigot. But my key thing is see the human. Look at the story. What has this person gone through? What has led them to believe that they are born in the wrong body? I don't believe they have been born in the wrong body, but I respect that they have come to believe that. But
Well, and
let's
it's
look
so
at that.
important to have compassion for somebody like that, because
This is compassion.
I've heard
Compassion is
some
trying to
people
understand
say,
someone.
yeah, and I've actually gotten in arguments with people who say there's no such thing as gender dysphoria. And I can attest to the fact that there is. I mean, I felt it very strongly. I had such intense hatred for my female body. And so it's important to be compassionate for the experience.
Yes.
And
And also, I mean, look at a or like a person who hears voices in their head. You're not going to tell them, no, you're not hearing voices.
right,
But at the same time, you're not saying the voices are real. In
yes.
fact, let me give you an amplifier so you can hear them even louder and everybody else can hear them. Can you
And
hear that?
everybody else will talk to those voices as if they're real too.
And we're like, but we can't hear anything. You can't say that. That's phobic. And
Right.
it's like, whoa. What was the point I was trying to make?
Penny.
Penny. So she went and had a double mastectomy at what,
She's
15?
so
And like,
young.
you're 15.
Yeah.
Now she's 16 and she's doing a fundraiser to have breast reconstruction. Now, once they've, a breast enhancement for a girl or a woman who has even the tiniest breast is very different from one who's had everything removed.
Yeah.
And what trauma are you putting your body through? What trauma are you going through psychologically, emotionally, as a 16-year-old? This is heavy duty stuff. Whereas, and this is very interesting, and I think that's one thing you pointed out in one of your talks, we know that up to, so young people who present with gender dysphoria, if you let them go through puberty, up to, what was it, 80, what was it, no, 70?
It's somewhere between 70 and 95%.
Yeah, so 6 to 23%, they continue presenting with that, having gone through puberty, but the lion's share kind of grow out of it. If you say it's a phase, I guess that's considered to be phobic, but it's a natural part of growing up to question yourself and to dislike yourself, especially as your body changes. And I think for girls, this is much more pertinent than for boys. For me, it was confusing because my body changed very slowly. So my voice never broke. It just changed very gradually. So around me, I saw the other guys going, when they were talking and growing facial hair. I didn't have to shave until I was 20. And even then, just very sporadically. And my body's always stayed very slim, not put on much muscle. So that was confusing for me. And again, I thought, because people would say, oh, as a child, you're so pretty. You would have been really pretty as a girl. And all that kind of stuff. You absorb these messages, you internalize that. And for me, that meant I wondered, am I a guy? Like, should I be a guy? Not in the sense of having gender dysphoria, because it didn't come from inside, but more in the
It's
sense of
external.
all that external stuff. What I did have as a child, I remember very clearly, I was 6 and I was leaving to go to school. So I was walking out the front garden and my mom said, make sure that you write on the lines in your exercise book, because my handwriting was all over the place. I don't know what came over me, but for some reason I said, from today, I am a beautiful woman. And I went to school. And I already had a high voice, but I started talking in a really artificial high, what I thought was a woman's voice as a 6-year-old. That's when the bullying started. But I never connected the two. And I remember my sisters, they're quite, well, one is my twin sister, and she was the opposite. She was a tomboy. So she would be the one beating up kids and climbing trees and doing all that kind of stuff and playing with my guns. Whereas I would beg her for her Barbies and kitchen sets, whatever. So it was kind of divided in a funny way between the two of us. I forgot where I was going again because I'm talking too much.
And I do think that that's really important that, I have 3 kids, and at some point in their childhood, each of them would have been considered transgender by today's standards.
By today's standards. So one evening I asked my mum, well, actually for my birthday, she asked, what would you want for your birthday? And I said, I want a nightgown. Like both my sisters had a nightgown, one with a little rabbit on it and one with, I don't know, a flower or a heart. And I wanted one of those. And my mum, I had pajamas. And my mum said, well, no, that's for girls. But if you ask nicely, maybe one of your sisters will give you one of theirs and you can sleep in it for one evening. And I did. And I remember when I wore it, I still see myself brushing my teeth at the mirror, wearing that little nightgown. And I felt so happy. Similarly, we had a dressing up box, and the only thing that I would ever pull out of that, whereas my twin was like a cowboy and stuff like that, I would just put on a yellow dress. That's the only thing I would ever wear. And as soon as I would put it on, I would feel like a beautiful woman. But that's just in a child's mind. I was just trying to emulate my mom, you know, or be like her, because we were very close then, still are. Wasn't
Well,
close to
and if
my
you're
dad.
anything like my son, I have a son who just liked pretty things. And
Exactly.
he's gone through
Or-
adolescence. He's very much a male now, but
Right,
he loved pretty things. And in our culture, somebody who loves pretty things is feminine.
right. So what? And it's like, it's the same with, like, my mom had some perfumes and little moisturizers, whatever, creams on her dressing table. And one day I just loved going in there and just smelling everything. But it's a sensory thing, right? And she had this one little perfume. It was tiny, a tiny little bottle. And, you know, as a kid, you don't understand that these things are expensive. So
Uh-oh.
I just
What did
went
you do?
and I emptied the whole body on me. It was just a tiny bottle, but I emptied the whole thing. Because again, I had no idea that you just dab it a little bit or whatever, because I'm a kid. So then I walk downstairs, I go downstairs, and my mum suddenly goes, "What?
Menno.
This is my expensive perfume. Who took it?" And I just went, "Oh, not me." And then she actually lined the three of us up, and she
Oh.
smelled one by one, and she just went, "It's you. You took my perfume." But again, it's not even about it being feminine or girly. It's more of a sensory way of exploring the world. And so what I would like to say is, be yourself, let kids be, let them grow into themselves, and stop saying, "Oh, perhaps you're trans." So this is where I think, if I had been a kid today, especially being consistently girly, if you want to call it that, and being a very stressed out child with all the bullying, I developed a number of nervous tics. This was in the early 80s, so there was no anti-bullying program in school. And the idea was that if you got bullied, you were asking for it, right? So from that, I learned it's my fault.
Mm.
Not just that it's my fault, but also I deserve it, because this is just
There
who
must
I
be
am.
something. Yeah.
And it's wrong. Therefore, I deserve this type of treatment. What can you do? So I became I can only see that now that I'm older, depressed as a child, to the point where when I was 7, I went up to a local pastor's house. I was standing across the road. I was only 7.
Oh.
And then the door opened and his 2 kids came out, and they must have been like 10 or something. And I ran across the road. I ran up the path to the door and I said, "Does the pastor live here?" And they said, "Yes." I'm like, "Where is he?" And they said, "Well, he in his office." So they took me to him, and I just cried and I just said, "Please, I want to die.
Oh.
I want to die. I pray every night to die, but I keep waking up. Why isn't God listening?" Because you internalize all that stuff. So now I'm very interested in thinking, okay, where in your life did you have key moments like you had with, you know, that event before your first grade? There are certain key lessons that we learn as children about what's wrong about us, or that there's something wrong with us. And these can be very traumatic events. And based on these messages, you try to make sense of the world. So if somebody had come up to me now, and if I was in that situation right now, and a child psychologist or a school counselor, and who had said, "Wow, you really like girls' toys. I'm sure they're not that literal about it." "Well, I hope not." And I would say, "Yes." And, "Oh, so you said that you wore your sister's nightgown and that you felt really good in it." "Yes." "And the yellow dress from the dressing up box." "Yes." "And you're very pretty, Menno, as a child." "Oh, thank you." It easily can go a certain way. And then I
Yeah,
thought,
and
how
if you add that you had those thoughts of suicide or not wanting to live on top of it,
exactly,
you would have been
all,
transitioned in a second. I mean,
all my friends were girls. Interesting is, how would my parents have responded to that? Because they're very pragmatic, down to earth people. So would they have gone along with that? But what if at school, they used the affirmation model and they had shown me the gender unicorn in class, and I would have, if they'd asked me, are you a boy or a girl? I may have well picked much more on the girl's side. Um, Even if my parents then hadn't been supportive of that, the school could then have thought, oh, well, they're transphobic parents. And the health providers could have thought, oh, but this child is really distressed. And the more you put into the child this picture of perhaps you're causing more distress. And
you're
then
reinforcing any dysphoria that they already have.
right. So and I don't mean to be disrespectful when I say, because they say, oh, you can't teach a child, you can't talk a child into being trans. I think you can.
Oh, I think you can.
You can make a child believe anything.
Well, you can
They
make a child believe that they're born in the wrong body, which is, I mean, if you can convince somebody of that, then you can pretty much convince them of anything.
look, kids believe in Santa Claus
Right.
until, whatever age. They believe in the tooth fairy. You're so impressionable as a child, and especially if you trust an older person. So when I went to secondary school in my first year, there was a teacher who was training to be a child psychologist, and she was never my teacher, but she must have seen me in school as an awkward, geeky, kind of skinny, girly boy. And she went up to me once and she said, look, is it okay if we have some conversations? So we did, and I felt very special that she wanted to chat to me, but I was also very shy at that age. Imagine if she had, been trained by these various organizations, like in the UK, we have gendered intelligence, or if someone from the charity Stonewall had trained her on how to speak with children who don't conform. It's, it's not a it's not difficult to imagine that you could have then been talked into, maybe that's not the right words, but led to
Well,
believe.
it encouraged, I think, encouraged in these misbeliefs.
Right.
And
And
in
because
my
I had
case, it
such
was this coping mechanism. I would have, and it's interesting as we talk here, because if both of us had been born a couple of generations later, then then I might be a man interviewing a woman according to the transgender ideology, because I have no doubt that both of us would have medically transitioned if we had been
well,
born at a certain time.
this is a scary thing, that when you put kids on puberty blockers, that's it, they'll transition. We
Yeah.
know that from the research. We also know that, as we said earlier, that if they go through puberty, then 23 to 6%, it's only 6 to 23% that actually want to then
Right.
continue, they still have the dysphoria and want to transition. But now you have trans people who are saying that you don't have to have dysphoria to be trans. And it's,
Right.
that's really offensive to the people who have dysphoria. And like
Right.
Zia that you spoke to, who's using it as a way to be able to live, and it's interesting when she said that she didn't have a vagina created, but just the external appearance. And the two women that I spent some time with, like one of them only transitioned or started, this is another thing, started 4 years ago. So when you say transitioned, it kind of says, oh, there's an end point.
Right. And that's the interesting
For a
thing.
lot
When
of
I've talked to a number of, especially males who are transitioning, they
them,
start with, maybe they'll get the bottom surgery and then the top surgery and then the Adam's apple shaved and then they want
right.
facial feminization. And what they're finding is that the dysphoria doesn't, or dysmorphia, whichever you want to call it, doesn't actually go away with the transition,
It
because
may help to lessen
it
it,
might lessen it a bit,
but
but over the long term, it's not a cure.
no, it's not a cure. And they usually say that, oh, if you don't let people transition, they'll self-harm and kill themselves. But a lot of them are still doing that after.
Right.
One particularly sad story. This is just so tragic. And this is when I think, see the human. We've lost sight of the human, right? So a girl, I think her name was Natalie. She was born in Belgium, in a family with three brothers, and the parents loved the brothers, but she felt very neglected and rejected as a child, and then thought, had I been born a boy, they would have loved me. Okay, I'm obviously simplifying things a bit, but this is part of their story. So then at one point they thought, okay, you know, I'm going to become a man to win my parents' love, and went for the surgery. Surgery for female who want to be male is much, much more difficult, much more difficult and dangerous than for male to female. And see, again, I'm using the language male to female when actually it's impossible from a biological point of view. Um, it went wrong. And they had a phalloplasty, but the body rejected it. Now, is that because the surgery went wrong? Or is that because the body knows what it is? Every cell in our body has the information about who and what we are. What we think about it is a whole different thing. Mother Nature gives us the equipment, and that's it. And Mother Nature is not a turf.
Well, and I always wonder why it is, if people are really into trans rights, why are they sterilizing all these kids who say that they're transgender? Because typically you don't go around sterilizing the group that you're advocating for. But in this case, these medical
There's a reason
interventions
for that.
result in sterilization.
Yes, yes, and you can't expect a 13-year-old to make up their mind about whether they want children later in life, because you haven't even developed your body, you haven't even developed your cognitive abilities, and you have no idea what it's like to be 30 and to want to start a family of your own. And one really touching moment of one of your talks is when you held your daughter in your arms, and it's such an I haven't experienced that. I may never become a parent. I don't have a wish to be a parent, but I can just imagine that that's such a magical thing. And this is what life is. It's giving life, right? Sorry, just back to Natalie, who then became Nathan.
Okay.
The body rejected, the phallus, which was basically the skin of their forearm, and attached to their, lower part.
Area.
Right, so this is called bottom surgery. And again, bottom surgery and top surgery make it sound a lot more palatable. So
yeah, when you talk about you're actually mutilating genital areas, and like you said, these are really risky surgeries. They're incredibly invasive, and I've just heard horror stories of people who've gone through phalloplasty.
Right, so Nathan, the body rejected it, and it started to die. It started to rot. Had subsequent surgeries to try and fix it. It didn't work. So Nathan sank into the deepest depression, hated their body because they just felt like Frankenstein, didn't know whether they were a guy or a girl anymore, and then basically died through euthanasia, because that's legal in Belgium, as it is in the Netherlands. So requested euthanasia, and it was granted. And all this was to win her parents' love. And her parents, upon her death, so this is just upsetting, and this is where I feel so much of this gets glanced over. The mother just said, "I don't care."
Wow.
So the sadness here is that sense of rejection. What can I do to win my parents' love? If I transition, or if I had been a boy, it would have been better. Actually, maybe I am a boy. It's human psychology is so incredibly complex. So for all this ideology to come in and to say, well, it's one or the other, and to not be able to question it. If you can't question something, you straight away, your alarm bell should be ringing. It's like, why am I not allowed to question this? And it's not about rights. I'm going to tell you what I think it is. It's nothing to do with people like you who had gender dysphoria as a child as a result of a traumatic experience. It's not about the women or the trans widows who lose their husbands. It's not about the parents who are now having to go to the local council and saying, what are these trans toolkits that the schools are using, and can you pull them because my child has now come home dysphoric. We have this rapid onset dysphoria now, and my child is presenting as something that they are not, and I'm not going along with it, and now we're having a massive rift in the family. It's not about the people who lose their children because the children say, you don't affirm me, I'm out of your life. All this suffering, right? And it's not like these, or the people that I met recently that I spent a weekend with, because the one who started their transition 4 years ago, they were married, the marriage is over.
Yeah.
They are a parent to a 4-year-old, and that's causing issues. They can't live in the family home, which is like apparently a very nice place. And this is, so I asked the question, and I apologized before I asked. I said, look, if this comes across really insensitive or naive, I apologize, but I don't know how else to phrase it. You've gone through all this stuff. Is it worth it? And she said, worth it? All I have to look forward to is a lifetime of medical bills. I have a 5-bedroom house somewhere that I'm not allowed to live in. I can only rent a little flat. What do I have for myself? And that's when I bit my tongue. Because I thought I could see that it was very sensitive. And this is where, I thought, okay, show compassion and show kindness, even though I would say I definitely peaked in February this year. It doesn't stop you from being a human being. It just means you start to be critical and be wary of this ideology, not the people,
Right.
the ideology. And for other trans people, the transition has saved their life. So we need to recognize that for everyone it's different. But there are so many issues. All of this doesn't matter, because this is not about rights or how happy people are. This is about marketing. Okay? So follow the money.
Yes.
Who is benefiting from this? Well, there are some companies that produce puberty blockers, the loop is called Lupron. They're providing this. So the earlier you can get a child on the blockers, I think in the States it's now even at 8, some kids go on it.
Yes.
The earlier they go on it, and that once they're on it, they're going to go onto the transition train.
Well, and in some ways, either way, they're going to be addicted to hormones, because the puberty blockers didn't deny them from developing appropriately, and you have to have hormones in your body to be healthy. So these kids now are going to be medicalized for the rest of their lives. And
yes.
One of the things, I'm not sure if you saw an interview I did, but there's actually pharmaceutical companies are now training counselors to go into schools, so that they can start recruiting right from the schools, and the pharmaceutical companies are paying for these counselors to go in there and basically recruit.
So it's the so-called educators that are getting paid. It's the hormone and the synthetic hormones, it's those producers getting paid. It's the surgeons getting paid, and they're all selling the dream of like, you can change sex, you can become not just a woman, but the woman you were always inside. Right. It's classic marketing, and it's genius marketing in a way, because what you're doing is when you get them to transition, they need the hormones, they need the blockers before that, they need the surgery, it's all money. They need the painkillers for after the surgery, they need the anesthetic.
Antidepressants, because, most of these kids are already depressed.
Right. And like one of the, the one that started her transition 4 years ago, she said, I'm working my way down from the top. So there's a whole plan. That's why she said, all I've got to look forward to is a lifetime of medical bills, but it's your choice. So she's had stuff done to the face, and, is working the way down. But the genius, in a way, of the marketing is if you have people who then want to detransition,
then you get even more money.
Surgery. They need reconstructive surgery. And the ones who have had, for example, a woman who's transitioned to be a man and has had a hysterectomy and then want to go back to being a woman, they then need more hormones
right. Either way they have to get hormones.
So what other business do you have where if somebody stops being your customer, they become your customer, but just for a different product?
Yes. And these products are expensive. I mean, I've heard quotes about Lupron being thousands of dollars.
In the UK, you have the NHS, and so certain surgeries are for free. But again, someone's paying for it. It's not, someone's still getting paid. And like my friend who's lived like this for 20 years, what was interesting, I learned so much about this, and I love learning about these things. So she's on, as I said, she's got that implant, or now she doesn't. She's got the patches. But she's also on testosterone. And I went, what?
Yeah.
I thought trans men would go on testosterone, right? And then she said, no, because everybody, like males and females, both produce naturally testosterone and estrogen and all the other stuff. Your body has a certain balance and it knows how to keep the balance. Now, she had, see, I don't want to say bottom surgery because that's not that doesn't describe what happened.
Yeah.
She had her testicles removed.
She was
Okay.
castrated.
Testicles
Yeah.
gone. So therefore doesn't produce enough
Right.
testosterone. Because, and I never knew this. I thought all your testosterone comes from your balls, basically. But the pituitary gland also produces some testosterone. But obviously it's not enough for the body to be able to maintain its functions if it's such a small dose of it. So she's on the cross-sex hormones, but also on the testosterone. And this all needs to be kept in a certain balance. Now, if I said to you, just to lighten it up a bit, my left testicle identifies as my right testicle. My right testicle doesn't like that because my right testicle is like, how can you just identify into me when I am the right testicle? And then the left right identified testicle says, you're trans testicle phobic. Okay, but it's interesting from a psychological point of view. So the one that started a transition 4 years ago, they have a child who is about 4, and they were in a shop. So she told me this story that they got some ice cream, and the woman at the checkout goes, oh, you've got yourself some nice ice cream. And the child just blurts out, as kids do, my daddy's a girl, and she's got patches.
Because kids do that.
Which mortified this person. They wanted the ground to swallow them up because they don't want to be seen as a trans woman.
Right.
They want to be seen as a woman.
Right.
On the other hand, they were very happy that the child was just so casual about it.
Right.
Right.
Well, and that brings up the point that I've always kind of confused me, that if trans activists are really advocating for trans people, why are they trying to say that they're not what they are, which is transgender? And
there's a reason for that, and I can relate to it as a gay man who's obviously gay. So as I said, I've been beaten up. I get called names. Just a few weeks ago, somebody called me a Betty boy, which is Jamaican for
interesting
derogatory term, right? Because I live in an area where there's a Jamaican community. Earlier this year in the park, somebody called me a fruitcake, and I have long hair, right? So I was walking through town with my long hair. I thought I was kind of going for sexy Tarzan, but this guy that I was having a chat with about politics randomly, he suddenly said, he was drunk. He went, "You look like a he, she."
Just because of your hair is beautiful, by the way.
I've never had it this long. That's lockdown hair for you.
Yeah, it's beautiful. But it surprises me that anybody would say that, because we're trying to break free of these gender roles. And I see men all the time now who are wearing their hair in a bun or a ponytail. And I mean, in the 60s, men grew their hair out long all the time. So how is it that now that is associating you with being gay? That's so interesting.
Well, I think it's just the overall package, because I walk like a poodle, according to my ex. I have a particular gait. It's the walk. It's maybe whatever I was wearing. It's the way I talk. You know, I've only had facial hair since lockdown, really. I never really used to. Normally, I just shave. So I think, and this is interesting again, it goes back to a question you asked earlier. Why do they not want to be seen as trans women, but as women? It's because if you pass as a woman, it means you're safe or safer, right? Because there's something called, and again, I didn't know this until I spent the weekend with them. It's called the gender jar. A jar as in a jarring kind of thing, right? So if you have a trans woman who looks very feminine in the face, particularly after they've had facial feminization surgery, but they still have the big Adam's apple, that's a gender marker. And therefore, if you look at that person, you just do a that's enough. That's the gender jar. And that goes back to us. No, we know who is a male and is a female. You know, it's not rocket science. You just know. It's just I think, an instinct that
Well,
we
and
have for
part of that
separation.
has to do with safety, I think, is that if a man has gone through the full surgery, they're not a danger to me in the bathroom as much as a man who is, clearly completely physically intact. That is much more of a threat to me. And so I think that, part of that has to do with us just trying to assess safety.
Look, exactly. And there's a reason why trans women want to go to the women's toilets and not the men's, because safety is a concern for them. So they can relate to it. And it was interesting when Zia said, the lonely transsexual,
Yes.
that she goes into the men's.
Yes.
Now, one thing that we haven't talked, we've talked a lot, I'm aware of that. But when I was in my 20s and living in London, as I still do, then I started doing acting work. This was not work that I was looking for, but I got typecast because then I was, younger, thinner, and I just got typecast as either a transvestite or a drag queen or a transsexual. At the time they called it transsexual, a trans woman. I've even been cast as a trans man.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
and I've always really enjoyed these experiences because you get to be in hair and makeup, you get professional people, you get to look amazing. And I just wanted to touch upon that a little bit because this was me as a transgender
Wow.
person. That's real hair, and then obviously you have a professional person doing your hair and makeup, so they make you look amazing. When my dad sees these pictures, he freaks out because it's like,
I don't think I've ever looked that good, Menno.
it's too real, but it's all make believe, right?
Right.
Here's another one. So
It's amazing what makeup can do, really.
right. And even then in theater, so this was all through different agents and stuff. So it's
Right.
not like it was the same people pushing me for those type of jobs.
Ah.
That's as Titania in Midsummer Night's Dream.
Wow. Does it count that I played the soldier boy in one of, I think it was Bertrand
That's how it all
Russell's?
started, your dysphoria. But see, look, this was me. So this is how thin I was.
Wow.
And so this was for a part where they hadn't done the wig yet, but I was playing a character. Everybody had to think that I was a girl. And then at the end, there's a twist that I'm a guy. It's not the most original plot.
Victoria kind of, yeah.
Very much like that. And at the casting, there were trans women there. So I got the jobs over them because they looked like they had surgery done.
Oh,
So,
interesting. So they wanted someone who looked like a man looking like a woman.
they wanted someone who could pass as a girl.
Right.
But the ones who were at the audition, they had surgery done that made them look like it was obvious they had work done. Which also meant that when the twist came in the story, that they couldn't look like a guy.
Right.
So they went for me because I had finer cheekbones and, they loved my collarbones, which is kind of weird. But
so just out of curiosity, you said that your dad cringes when he sees those pictures. And if this is too personal, just let me know. But I've heard rumors, especially from Tavistock Clinic, as well as, I've seen interviews of people who clearly are concerned that they might have a gay boy or a lesbian daughter. And it seems to me like the parents are actively encouraging that child to adopt a transgender identity so that they appear to be straight. And I was just curious, how do you think your parents would have been more comfortable if you had transitioned and presented as a girl and they could have had, a straight daughter rather than a gay son?
In my case, I think my parents are too down to earth for all that stuff, and they would have just said, Menno, you're a guy. Yeah, because I actually spoke to my mom about this yesterday, and this was all like, whoa, to her, like the stuff I was talking about. One thing I just wanted to point out with these type of roles that I've done is, because I also remember one evening I was, the first time I ever did drag in a bar, right? It was for like a talent contest in London. And I'd never done it before. I didn't know how to dress. I didn't know what to do with the makeup or the wig or whatever. I looked like an absolute mess. But there was another drag queen in the toilet who helped me with my makeup. And she got up really close to me. She did my eyebrows and she did them really badly. And I think she did that on purpose because obviously we were competing against each other.
To be prettier than her.
But here's the question that she asked me. And this is a very, for me, important point. she asked me when I was done, so do you feel all woman? And I just went, no, I'm a guy in a dress. So even though I've been confused in terms of, am I the right type of man, you know, or should I have been a girl? That was more from all that outside stuff that you're getting rather than an internal sense. And when I get quite like when they asked me, what's your drag name? I didn't have one for a long time. I made one up eventually, but I couldn't think of one because for me, it wasn't I'm just me, but
Well,
in a dress.
it makes me wonder that, you know, for that drag queen that asked you that, um, it makes me concerned that a male would think that the only thing to being a woman is putting on a dress and makeup, and that makes you feel like a woman. It really indicates to me that they probably have no idea what it means to actually feel like a woman.
Right. And often I think it is a man's idea of what they think a woman is. You can say I feel like a woman, but it's a man's
It would be
interpretation of
like me
what a
saying I
woman
feel
is.
like a lizard. Well, I can think I feel like a lizard, but I will
So
never
some
really know
people
if I
do.
feel like a lizard because I'm not a lizard.
But and I think it's a valid question, although again, they'll say it's a transphobic question. How can you feel like something that by your nature you are not? And it's interesting because there's a trans woman called Monroe Bergdorf, you know, who's very successful and on lots of shows. And she, you know, said more than once to someone who interviews her and asks her a question, well, you don't know what it's like because you're not trans. And I
Oh,
go,
oh.
well, then how do you know what it's like to be a woman when you're not one? And
Interesting.
I've looked, huh? And I've looked
Yeah, hello. And that's where this whole ideology is so convoluted. It's like there's just no, you know,
but
there's no internal structure to it. There's no internal coherence to it.
no. And again, it's like, what's the story? See the human. What's the
Yeah,
story? So I looked at some interviews that she's done. Um, and she was bullied a lot as a gay effeminate guy
right.
in you know as a teenager. And I saw a video of her when she was still a teenager, I think, and going through first procedures on the face, fillers and stuff like that. um, and they were talking about how much they wanted the facial feminization surgery, which they got later on because they did a program, and the program was called What Makes a Woman. And I find this I find offensive. How can you make a program claiming that you're finding out what makes a woman when you're not a woman? You know, if you're a trans woman, make a program about my experiences in life as a trans woman, you know, and the hardships as a trans woman, because these stories need to be heard. But to claim that you are a woman and to say, now I'm going to tell you what makes a woman. And then half the program was about her getting surgery on her face, right? Why? Because she said I was scared to leave the house because outside the house I can't control the light and how it hits my face. And if it hits my brow in a certain way, it'll reinforce my masculine skull structure or my maleness.
No, I just find
So
that so sad that somebody
I'm
went through
having it
such,
erased.
and I mean, the surgery is, it's so difficult. And you know, as I've gotten older, I look at my face in the mirror and I'm not delighted all the
But most
time,
people
you know.
aren't.
But to the idea that we're telling people that if you have these anxieties about how you look, the appropriate thing to do is to get these surgeries rather than to try and figure out what it is about this anxiety that you can address. I just find that really sad.
Well, this is where it goes down to love yourself for who you are. And I go back to the trans woman with the 4-year-old who said, my daddy's a girl and she's got patches. Then I asked, do you mind, how do you want your child to refer to you now? Do you want do you want them to keep using
Daddy.
daddy? Because Caitlyn Jenner is very clear about that. You know, they're still the father and the daddy. And this person I spoke to was conflicted about that. And that's where I'm like, well, okay, but you're a trans person. You're on the hormones. You're having the surgeries. How do you go from that then to wanting to be the mother? Because then I'm like, okay, now how are you separating yourself from reality? And reality is hard for most of us. And the more you go along with the fact that I am really truly a woman, and then trying to prove it through all these surgeries, and like, she used a phrase, and then I'll go back to Monroe Bergdorf, because it was a similar theme that I picked up, and I could be wrong, you know. You could easily say you're not an expert, you know, don't know what you're talking about. Fine. In a moment of frustration during the conversation, and this person said, "I just don't want to be reminded of the ghost of him."
Mm.
And I thought, wow, it's beautifully put. But that's when I thought, are you transitioning towards something or away from someone?
Right.
Like Nathan, who transitioned away from a girl because she thought that as a boy or a man, she would get her parents' approval.
Right.
And this is where human psychology is so complex. And I think it's much more compassionate to try and understand this. And also with that particular person, I keep wanting to say their name just to make it easier, but I can't. We were talking about loving yourself, right? And she's like, look, I tried all these things that you're talking about, but it didn't work. That's why I transitioned. But now they're in the same place.
Only they've got all these medical issues now.
There's a whole host of other things that she's constantly worried about how people perceive her. And one of the problems that both of them had that weekend was their voices. So because their voices got really sore really quick because we were talking so much. And then I've done some stuff, you know, in performing, and I said, they asked me, do you know some vocal exercises? And I said, I do, but you're going to have to kind of make a choice. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, look, the exercises I know are about relaxing the voice and letting the voice come out in its natural state. Whereas they both use this higher sort of nasally, unsupported voice because they want to take the bass out, because otherwise you get the gender jar.
Right.
And they want to avoid that, because if people perceive you to be, well, really what you are, rather than what you would like them to see, that could increase abuse.
Right.
Right. So they want to minimize the gender jar. And for a few people I know who are trans, their whole life is about minimizing the gender jar. That's why there's all the behaviors and all the mannerisms and the changing of the voice. And I'm like, this is where I think, okay, so what is being authentic? If being
they're relying all on external validation rather than internal validation.
If the real you is about performance, then how is that authentic?
Yeah.
And I don't mean that as a nasty question. I think that's an interesting question. So I said to them, do you want your voice to come out as it is and for your voice to be free? Or do you want to put on a performance? Because then I can't help you. And the reason I can give you some things to do to help the voice afterwards when it's sore, but I can't help you to bring a certain quality of the voice out when that's not where your voice naturally sits. And the shame of that and it's funny, right? Because the one who's lived like this for 20 years, they have a dog, and we're walking along the seaside, and the dog was a bit far away. So they called the dog's name, and that's when the other voice came out.
Right.
You have
the
to
power voice.
Whereas with the one who only started transitioning 4 years ago, whenever she laughed or she thought something was funny, she did this.
Oh, which seems so restrictive.
It's restrained, it's restricted, but also it's performative.
Yes.
What's nicer, you know, one of the really nice things in life and a moment of freedom and joy is when you can just throw your head back and you laugh. Laughter, you know. So this is where I have questions about what is really authentic.